Well, crisis averted. We didn't know if we were going to be able to record an episode of the podcast tonight because Sal's charger on his brand new laptop stopped working, but
Oh,
he's got that taken care of. And here we are for another episode of It's Always Game Day in Buffalo. Hello, everybody. Matt Bove, Sal Capaccio. We are now, a week and a half into free agency, and we've got plenty more to talk about because it feels like every day the Bills have some sort of new update or new bit of news that happens.
yeah. I mean, tonight I really underscored. I think we already knew this, Matt, but how much we all rely on technology, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I just got this brand new laptop a couple weeks ago, and for some reason the cord just stopped working. It's just bad cord, I guess. And I literally had to just I said, Matt, I got to run to the Apple store because I'm a Mac guy, Apple products, and not to be controversial. I know some people aren't, but that's what I have. So I went there and got it, and they were very gracious enough to kind of help me right away and got back in time. So here we are. But yeah, we rely on technology a lot to get things done. You're right. Everything's happening so quickly here in the off season. And, this is the way it works every year. You go right from the playoffs to the Super Bowl to the Senior Bowl to the Combine to free agency, new league year, owners meetings. It's going to be the draft soon. The schedule release. We got to get with Mike North, by the way. That'll be fun this year. But I mean, here we are. We're right here smack dab in the middle of the off season, right before the workouts begin. I mean, teams are going to start working out in a month. It's amazing.
Yeah, I'm starting to turn a corner a little bit too, because I think I said a couple episodes ago that I was getting a little bit impatient with the moves that the Bills have been making. And now that we are a week kind of out from probably when I said that was pretty early in the process. Now that they've added a couple additions that I would qualify as solid additions to the team, I think that they've done a nice job getting younger, but also adding some talent and skill that they did not previously have. So I think that they are starting to turn a corner. There is still certainly work left to be done, especially when you look around the division and some of the other things that teams are adding, especially the Jets. The Jets have had a very busy offseason, but I do think the Bills have made a number of solid additions, and they're kind of starting to creep back up towards maybe the level that they were at, the talent that they lost, and who knows, maybe they can even surpass that.
It's interesting you just said about the AFC East. I agree with you. I think that the Bills, the Jets, and the Dolphins, I mean, you could say the Bills are kind of been stagnant in what they've done. I don't think they've done anything that's made them that much better, but, the players that they've lost, I also think, there was age concerns and things like that. The Dolphins, I do not think have had a good offseason. I think the Jets and the Patriots both have actually had good off seasons for different reasons. Patriots stabilizing themselves a little bit. They've needed to do that. I like their offseason. It's going to be a bit of a slower build there, but I think they're finally doing it the right way as opposed to, the last several years and how Bill Belichick ran the show. So I think it is going to be really interesting. But of course, with the Jets, it's going to come down to injuries and Aaron Rodgers and keeping him healthy, but they made a couple nice additions. Tyron Smith at left tackle, and now, Mike Williams at wide receiver should help them. The Bills do have some additions, and I'll ask you, Matt, if you think that there's, a correlation here to how they've kind of also built back in the first iteration of when they came in, meaning McDermott and Bean. What I mean by that is it feels like the guys they're signing, which we can talk about Casey Toohill and Mike Edwards, the guys that they're signing to me feel like they're guys who've been in the league, but are ascending and haven't quite had their shot. Right. And they feel Nicholas Morrow, right? Like he had his shot, but guys that are right in that sweet spot where they've have enough experience, but they haven't really been able to show what they can do. And the Bills feel they can tap into that and they can get them at a cheaper rate because they haven't made their mark yet.
Doesn't Mike Edwards have a little bit of Jordan Poyer in him? Don't you watch the Mike Edwards tape and you read what people have said about Mike Edwards and you're like, wow, that sounds a lot like Jordan Poyer. And maybe they're going to utilize him in ways that the Bills use Jordan Poyer. I absolutely agree with you. I think that they are trying to find guys that maybe are not the best players on the market, but that are the best fits in what they are trying to do. And I think that that's what they've kind of put an emphasis on for the last week. Is Curtis Samuel the best wide receiver available? No. But in their mind, he's probably a really good fit with what they're trying to do. You can say the same thing about Mike Edwards. You can say the same thing about some of the other additions that they've made. It feels like they know what works for them, and it also feels like the players know it. That was one of the first things that Mike Edwards said today on his Zoom call. We're recording this on Wednesday, that this is a safety-friendly team, and he wants to go to a place where he thinks he can have success. Look at what those two guys just did. They deserve the credit because they have been outstanding players. But a lot of it is also because of the system that's been in place and Sean McDermott knowing how to get the most out of safeties. So, yeah, the Mike Edwards one feels like, hey, there's a little bit of Jordan Poyer here, and I bet the contract is pretty favorable. Now, it's going to be more than what Jordan Poyer got paid this year, but they're banking on the upside. They're banking on the age. He's, what, 6 years younger than Jordan Poyer, and he's a 2-time Super Bowl champ.
Yeah, that's right. Bringing that kind of moxie, that experience, that playoff experience, that Super Bowl experience, that means something, right? To guys who've been around, who've been in the league. So this is the last time we talked. It was Curtis Samuel was the last, kind of big signing. Since that's happened, Mike Edwards, just kind of talked about him a little bit. Casey Toohill has also joined the team. He's a defensive end. They go back to the Washington Commanders there after they get Curtis Samuel to add him. And then they officially announced Ty Johnson, but we talked about that already. Staying on Mike Edwards. I agree with him. It is interesting when he says it's a safety-friendly team. Like, if there's one position, one group on the team that I'm not too concerned about, even if you kind of have to replace it with no-name guys, it is safety, because it feels like the system they run and the way Sean McDermott coaches and the way his staff coaches, I feel like they'll always be okay there. That doesn't mean you could just throw anybody out there. I'll be honest, I'd be concerned if DeMar Hamlin was the starting safety. He's a special teams player, right? But I feel like a lot of guys can really fit into this system and excel because Sean McDermott is a really good coach and the system is conducive for that.
Do we think they're done now? Do we think that they're comfortable at safety? Do we think they're comfortable rolling Mike Edwards and Taylor Rapp as their day one starters? Do you think that this is something that they're still going to be shopping around for another guy? I mean, we still, once again, don't exactly know what's going on with Micah Hyde. I don't think he's coming back now, especially the way that Mike Edwards talked about it. He was like, those two guys have been here for so long. He didn't say Jordan Poyer has been here for so long. He referred to them kind of in the past tense. So I'm sure they kind of let him know what's their plans are before he signs here. But I don't know. I don't necessarily think they're completely done, though. I think that they could be, but I don't think that means they are, if that makes sense.
I think they're done looking for a starter caliber player. I do not think they're done looking for depth, but to me, that depth will most likely find itself in the way of a younger player in the draft. A guy like DeMar Hamlin, who they drafted a few years ago to be a backup and a special teams player. A guy like Cam Lewis, who was an undrafted free agent, now in his 6th year, who's developed into a starting caliber type of player. And I still think that Cam Lewis shouldn't be discounted, by the way, for challenging for a starting job. I wouldn't predict that he's going to make it right now, but I do think that he's the third safety, and he's a guy that could wind up being, someone they could rely on a little bit more. So to answer your question, Matt, I don't think they're done, but I don't think they're looking for anybody that's going to vault either Rapp or Edwards or even Cam Lewis for that matter on the depth chart.
Now, when you say that, though, do you also include the draft in that? Because coincidentally today, we're doing prospect profiles leading up to the draft, and we'll every day for a couple weeks have a different prospect that we think the Bills could be interested in. And usually that would mean the first round, or in this case, the first or second round. And one of the players that we were profiling is Tyler Nubin, the safety from Minnesota. And a lot of people who I talked to at the Combine love the player. They love the potential fit in Buffalo. I just have a hard time now thinking the Bills would draft a safety in the first round, or maybe even the second round. Well, I shouldn't say the second round. I have a hard time thinking the Bills would draft a safety in the first round. Now, I had a hard time beforehand, but now I really feel like I do.
I've never believed they would draft a safety in the first round, or maybe even the second round. I've been saying for months, and this, we talked about this at the Combine. It's just not a position to me that they look for that type of asset. They don't want to pay a guy huge money, and they don't want to draft a guy that high. I think third, fourth round is where they start to look at it. So no, I don't think that they're out of the safety market in the draft. I do think they're out of the safety market early in the draft. To me, it's going to be a younger late round pick.
Let me ask you a question. Why do you think that? Because we haven't had any evidence to say they don't feel that way. They've just had a really good safety combination for 7 years. We don't know how they feel about the safety position because we haven't needed to know. This whole time it's been Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. Maybe they value it so much, and those guys were just so good that they never had to address it.
It's a great question. Here's my empirical evidence, okay?
Okay.
Anytime they had any question about Poyer or Hyde, they didn't go out to replace them with somebody who's a big name or a lot of money. Not that they could afford it, but it was always somebody who knew their system, who was around and could. Kurt Coleman came in. They would go out. They brought him back. Who was the other guy I'm thinking of? Dean Marlowe, right? Every year, Dean Marlowe comes in and plays safety. And then on top of that, Matt, we go to the Combine, and what did Brandon Beane say about safety? The kind of player that they like. Not the biggest, the fastest, the strongest, but the guy that has ball skills and range, IQ. He's really smart. To me, that screams that's not a first or second round pick, because those are the guys that go in the first and second round. The first and second rounders are the guys that, oh my God, a team's got to have him. Look how good of a player he is. Teams now, the NFL has changed. You're seeing a lot more too high split safety look. Sean McDermott has talked about this a lot. So why spend the assets on a first or second round safety or spend big money when you're really looking for two guys who can get the job done as a tandem?
Yeah, that's a very good counterpoint. I do understand everything that you're saying, but I think given the importance of the position to what they are trying to do, even with an ever-evolving NFL landscape, maybe it's worth ripping off the Band-Aid and addressing it now, and then once again not having to think about it for several years. Like, I'm not advocating for them to take a safety in the first round, but there is something to be said. If you think you could get a starter for the next 5, 6, 7 years, is that better than taking kind of a lottery ticket on a wide receiver? And I'm very much team wide receiver. Do not get me wrong. That is just a question that I would love to know the answer to. What is more important to you? The best safety in the class, who we feel really confident is going to be a long-time starter for this team, or the 5th or 6th best receiver who we think has upside, but we don't know how big of an impact they'll make immediately? I feel that wide receiver is the more valuable thing to do, but I wonder how they feel. And we'll honestly probably never know, because 1, they wouldn't tell us before the draft. And 2, whenever they do draft somebody, that person was always the best on their board and the guy that they always wanted. You know, that's the normal thing we hear about the draft. So I don't know if we'll ever know the answer to that question.
It's really interesting draft discussion, though, that you brought up there. The 4th best or 6th best versus the 1st best. It's a larger discussion we can get into. I don't think you can ever get caught up in that personally. And I think you're making a mistake. Teams are, not you, Matt Bove. I think teams are making a mistake if they ever get caught up in, well, we can't take the 6th best guy and what position over the 1st. Well, yes, you can. If he's a better player, it goes by your board. If the 6th best safety, if the 6th best wide receiver on your board is ranked 50th, but the 1st best safety is ranked 104th, you take the guy that's ranked 50th. I mean, it doesn't matter what position he is in. I do think teams can make the mistake of not doing that. That's why I don't think you can. You got to stick to. That's why I always say stick to your board. It's actually something I was thinking about the other day. We always talk about best available player versus need, and it's always best available player. But I get that teams say, well, it's really not, because what the best available player is a quarterback. That's true. What it is the best available player at a position you can use. It doesn't have to be a need. It's a position you can use. You're not going to use a quarterback if the Buffalo Bills, the best available guy, is sitting there. You're not taking him because you can't use him.
I just keep thinking back to, as we have this conversation, I don't want to harp on safety too much, because I like the Mike Edwards edition. I really do. I think that this for them is a starter. I think this is going to be a guy that's in their plans. I just keep thinking back to a couple years ago in Kyle Hamilton coming out, and people loved Kyle Hamilton, myself included. He was such a good player. And a lot of people, even though it was very clear that he would probably not be available for the Bills, he was a name that felt like was generating a little bit of buzz with people who cover the team and just different conversations around the league. And you think back to, man, what if the Bills had Kyle Hamilton? Like that's a player. And I'm not saying that anybody in this draft class is anywhere even close to that, but I do think that.
Well, let me ask you this though. That's great. And I'm not debating the player. He's great. How much of a difference does that guy make at safety, considering what they already have been able to do or can do, considering what their defense usually is, versus how much of a difference someone else can make at a different position, if that makes sense, right? The return on investment for a great safety, but you're already a really good defense.
Well, how do you know that you don't know the answer to that? Because unless you take one of them out of it, it's the same thing. How do we know how valuable Poyer and Hyde are to the Bills until we see them without Poyer and Hyde?
Right.
I don't know the answer. For the last 7 years, I've thought that they are massive reasons why. Like, there are absolute pieces of evidence that you can point to. You could say the Bills never got beat over the middle or especially over the top in the middle of the field with those guys as their safeties, almost ever. And then they missed that game in Miami a couple years ago, and Dolphins hit a big one down the middle of the field. Yep. They get into the red zone. They score a touchdown a couple plays later, and you're like, that play doesn't happen if they have Micah Hyde or Jordan Poyer, maybe even one of them, let alone both of them on the field. So I don't know the answer to that, but then that's the exact same conversation you can have about a defensive tackle as we get ready for the draft. Defensive tackle is a need for the Bills. is it a big enough need for a guy who's going to be on the field 40% of the time that you would use a first-round pick on that position, even though it's a need and even though they might be the best player on the board? I don't know. I don't know.
Well, the Bills didn't sign a defensive tackle. They're going to have to replenish it, but they did sign a defensive end. The Bills go to Washington again after getting Curtis Samuel for Casey Toohill. And the more I dig in on Casey Toohill, the more I like this signing for the reason that I said earlier. He seems like an ascending player who had 5 sacks last year and only 8 starts. He played 16 games, who maybe just hasn't quite had his shot yet. He had a really good defensive line, of course, in Washington he played with. They got rid of a couple of the guys later on in the season last year, but he had his best year last year, had a sack each of the previous 2 years. And then he has 5 sacks last year. Now, I would also say I thought the same thing about Tim Settle, and it didn't work out. I thought Tim Settle.
It sounds like you're talking about Tim Settle again.
That's right, but I don't want to hold that against Casey Toohill, right? I mean, like Tim Settle didn't work out, and maybe that is the case. But this feels like, and he's a big guy. He's a very athletic big guy. They love those big athletic traits. When you get a big guy like a Spencer Brown, a Tommy Doyle, a Greg Rousseau, who is an athlete, the Bills love that. This is a big dude who's an athlete, and I wonder if the Bills feel like, hey, we're going to tap into his potential. I also wonder, Matt, is this the Shaq Lawson replacement? And Shaq Lawson may be a guy that they don't bring back.
Well, I think Shaq Lawson still is coming back.
Okay.
And I think that there will be Shaq Lawson for the last several years has not been a lock to make this roster. He has been a guy who comes to training camp and has performed well enough that he ends up making the roster. I think we could see the same thing happen this year. At best right now, Casey Toohill is what? Their fourth best?
Yes.
Edge rusher, right?
He's fourth, and he could be 5th behind Kingsley Jonathan. Yep.
Exactly. So I think it's not a crazy expensive move. You're banking on the upside. You're banking on, hey, we think we can get this much more out of this player in a rotation here. But I don't think it should be anything that prevents you from addressing the position moving forward. It's different than Mike Edwards. Mike Edwards is, okay, this guy is coming in, even though he does not have a ton of starts. He's got enough, but he doesn't have over the course of his career. He's not been like, okay, he starts 16 games no matter what. Mike Edwards is a move that you make because you think he is going to start for you. Casey Toohill is a move that you think, okay, this guy's going to get 20% of the snaps on defense every game. We think that he'll still be able to get 3, 4, 5 sacks. And it also makes it a little bit less of a need in case we can't address it in the draft.
Yeah, and I keep looking at the defensive line, and I'm still wondering why they haven't attacked defensive tackle. Now, we do know that we think, at least the reporting was, they were in on Eric Armstead. By the way, did you see that contract? Kind of glad the Bills didn't go down that road. I mean, he's going to be counting pretty massive cap hit for the Jaguars. Jaguars are really spending some money this offseason. Sebastian Joseph Day was in for a visit. There's another player I just read today, and his name escapes me. I read that. You can try and find it, but it feels like they want to do something there, but they haven't. And I wonder if that's where they go in the draft, because we've seen it before. We've seen it a lot of times before. They took Ed Oliver. They took Greg Rousseau. They took AJ Epinesa. They've taken defensive linemen high, whether that's a tackle or an end. I wonder if that's where they go. Now, wide receiver train, my colleague Jeremy White, he loves to drive that, and I'm on it. I want to see the Bills take a wide receiver. But at this point, after what they've done in free agency or haven't done, I don't think we can discount defensive tackle right now.
No, Austin Johnson is the name that you were thinking of. He is he's listed as a defensive end. He's played for the Chargers, but he's a 3-4 defensive end. He would be an interior guy in Buffalo. And it's funny because Daquan Jones tweeted about how good of a player he was on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday he is apparently visiting with the Bills. And once again, this would be a depth move. This would probably be Daquan's backup or one of their backups. So I do think that this has become the second most important position that still needs to be addressed. And at this point in the offseason, this point in free agency, I don't think there's anything they could do that would change that. I don't know if there's anybody they could add where I would say, okay, well, defensive tackle is now not as big of a need. I think they could go out and sign the best available free agent, and you would still say, well, you've got Daquan Jones for 2 years, you've got whoever this free agent is, and you've got Ed Oliver. They love their rotational pieces there. I think they'll add at minimum one more guy, and they'll probably bring back Jordan Phillips if he wants to keep playing football. That is what I think will happen. they could even add multiple guys. And as we get ready, we're a month from the draft. I would bet very good money that their first round pick is either a wide receiver or a defensive tackle.
All right. Well, speaking of that, today, as we talk, Wednesday was the Texas Pro Day. A couple of really interesting names at wide receiver: A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy.
Xavier Worthy.
And yeah, and the Bills had a couple of very interesting people on hand. Brian Gain, their assistant general manager, was there, but also their senior personnel director. Let me get his name here. I just want to make sure, because he was Matt Barzagan, as I think is how you say his name. And I think he's been with the Bills for a couple of years, I believe. But they were both on hand. And I wonder if this means anything. You have two of your top personnel people. Now, Brandon Beane was on hand to watch at Alabama's Pro Day, and there's plenty of people there, not necessarily wide receivers. But I wonder if you read anything to the Bills sending two of their top personnel guys to Texas to possibly watch their two wide receivers.
Well, you know who else was there in Texas was the consensus top defensive tackle in the
class. That's right, of
Murphy.
Course. Yes.
So they could be there for a lot of different things, right? Like one of those two positions.
I'm thinking wide receivers with these guys. Yeah, they got me. That's right.
You're double dipping here. I think that they're going to do their due diligence, and they already have done their due diligence on all of the top 10 wide receivers in the class, whoever you think the top 10 wide receivers are. I was even today at a local restaurant for lunch, and somebody came up to me and said, which wide receiver are they going to take? And I said, wow, that's a great question. Well, it depends what they're looking for. And then we started talking about Brian Thomas, and we started talking about Troy Franklin and Keon Coleman and Xavier Legette. Like, there's not this is all preference. This is like going out and picking a car. Some of them do one thing really well, but they lack in another area. Some of them do a different thing really well. So, yeah, I'm sure if they're looking for just pure blazing speed, they're going to go try and get Xavier Worthy. But I also think, given the additions that they've made, like a Donnie Mitchell makes more sense to me now than a Xavier Worthy does. You know what I mean? Like, just given the skill set that they have in their room already.
And you're so right. I was so focused on the wide receivers, not only Byron Murphy, but T'Vondre Sweat as well, right? I mean, they have terrific defensive tackles, but the Bills did send a couple of guys out there. And again, Brian Gain, and it's Matt Bazagran is how you say his name. He is their senior personnel executive. I just want to get his title right. They were both on hand to watch the Texas Pro Day. So I wonder what that means. I do think the Bills are very interested in still adding to the wide receiver room. Nothing that they've done, including Curtis Samuel, takes me away from that. I don't know how it'll all work at the end, but I do think that they're still interested in adding to the wide receiver group. We'll see where that goes when the draft comes about towards the end of April. They also added someone else to the organization. So, Matt, the Bills have a new COO. The Sabres do as well. His name is Pete Guelli, and he is from Rochester. He went to Aquinas High School. Then he went to Brockport, worked for the Bills for quite a while, and then moved on to work for the Charlotte Hornets and then the New York Giants. He's been in executive positions for quite a while in sports, different sports. Now he comes back home to Buffalo. You and I both had a chance to jump on a Zoom call to learn more about Pete Guelli. What did you learn?
I didn't learn too much, to be honest. I think that he said all of the right things. I want to see how he implements those things. Everything he said is what I would expect somebody who's hired to be the chief operating officer of a professional sports organization says. The one thing I liked specifically with the Sabres, him talking about the success that they feel like they built in Charlotte with a team that was struggling, a team that not a lot of people were going to those games, and they were able to slowly turn it around. Now, it did not turn around to the level that, some of the other NBA organizations that are in the league have seen. But I do think that that's important. I also appreciate the fact that he says and realizes that there is a lot of work to be done. He's like, going to a Sabres game is an experience, and we need to improve every aspect of that experience, which to me, reading between the lines, is like, hey guys, we know the arena's not great and the product on the ice hasn't been very good, and there's a lot of things that we need to improve on. I know they're starting with the scoreboard, they're starting with the roof, but I also got the vibe today that that's just where they're starting, and they've got a lot of big plans. As far as the Bills are concerned, I'm really interested to know how you step into a role after previously working with the team during a time period that's very different. That's fascinating to me because you can't come back and try and do the same things that you were doing because the organization has evolved and improved so much since you left 15 years ago. So it's almost like going into a new building, a new organization completely. So I don't necessarily know how much those previous 10 years actually even matter.
Yeah, listen, I don't know Pete, but I know of him, and I know a lot of people who know Pete. He moved back to Buffalo. He moved away from Buffalo, I should say, in 2009. I moved back to Buffalo in 2011. So our paths never crossed, but plenty of people that we work with and around did work with Pete or know Pete in some capacity. So I reached out to a few of them, and pretty much the answer was given to me every time, Matt, which is, oh, yeah, Sal, you're going to like him. That's pretty much the answer I was given. He seems like he's a guy that understands the landscape of all these different sports and how they work. He's coming in at a time where, and I asked him about this on the Zoom. I mean, in the 90s, it was always, are the Bills ever going to, when are they going to leave? When are they going to leave? Because we all think they're going to leave someday because they can't afford, the market here and they need a new stadium. That was his challenge along with his, department that he worked with to kind of keep the Bills here. Well, now he jumps in and they're building a new stadium. They're already staying here. So it's kind of interesting for him to jump back in that regard. Then you have the Sabres right there. And even though he's never worked in hockey, I do think that, him being a part of an organization in Charlotte where they had some challenges, probably can parallel that in a little bit. So I think that at least more than anything, he seems like he has a good grasp of what's going on. But I think the most important thing for both organizations is stability. Matt, they've had so many people in and out of these positions over the last several years for various different reasons. We know that. Just give some stability. And if Pete Guelli can give stability to the Bills and the Sabres and Pegula Sports and Entertainment and Terry Pegula to be the top person in both organizations, that will go a long way in helping.
Yeah, well, he becomes the third COO for the Bills in less than a calendar year, the second in that same time frame for the Sabres in less than a year. So obviously there's been a lot of turnover. This is a high-powered position. This is the person who is working basically hand in hand with Terry Pegula about all of these big decisions. Now, I'm wondering also how much involvement he will have in the stadium project, because it feels like that's almost kind of been figured out already, even with past regimes and with what they've operated on for the last several months. I'm sure his input will be listened to, but I don't know how much tweaking there is at this point. I feel like, okay, this is what we're doing. We're building this thing, and this is when we plan on opening it. So I don't know how he's going to be involved there, but I'm sure he'll be involved in the PSL process, which is something a lot of fans want to know about because it's something that's so different. He was asked about that today, and he said, I've got experience working with PSLs. That's the model we use in New York because he was with the Giants previously. It actually looked like he did the Zoom call today from his office with the Giants. So PSLs are something that he's going to have to figure out specifically on the Bills side of things. And then on the Sabres side of things, I think there's going to be a lot of involvement. I think that basically the way it will work with the Sabres, he'll handle all the business stuff. Kevin Adams will handle all the hockey stuff, and they both report to Terry. That's kind of the sense that I got from the Zoom call today. So yeah, stability would go a long way because there has not been much stability within the last year.
He also has, by the way, sports radio experience. He actually
no kidding.
Yeah, I worked a little bit in Rochester. Mike Shope, my colleague on WGR Sports Radio 550, he knows Pete Guelli from sports radio. And I think he actually did host. He hosted a show or two along the way in Rochester. So he's a media guy too. So, that's pretty cool.
Great. It's funny because you said you called a couple people when you found out the news. I did the same thing. Just called different people who have worked in the business longer than I have and asked them what they knew about him. And the first call I made, because it's almost always the first call I make, and I don't think you would mind me sharing this, is Mike Catalana. So I called Mike Catalana at 13 Wham in Rochester. So I'm like, oh, this guy's from Rochester. Mike Catalana has basically become the mayor of Rochester. I'll call Mike. I'm like, hey, do you know who Pete Guelli is? He's like, yeah, of course I know who Pete Guelli is. Why? And I was like, well, he's the new COO of the Bills and Sabres. He was like, he is? No kidding. So I broke the news to Mike, but it seems
That's
like
funny.
the guy's got pretty rave reviews. So I'm sure that he'll be, I guess, I don't know. I don't want to say I'm sure he'll be enjoyable to work with, but I guess we'll find out. I don't know.
But it feels like, and it sounds like that's the case. So if people are wondering, and the only thing that bothered me, Matt, and I get it, people are jilted, right? I mean, we're in this city here. We have a 13-year NHL playoff drought, and the Bills haven't been able to get over the hump, and they've gone through COOs and VPs and senior VPs left and right. And I get all that. I understand all that.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the minute he's announced, I see a lot of fans with, well, he worked with the Bills in the 2000s, the Charlotte Hornets, and then the Giants. None of those teams succeeded. So, okay, here we go, hiring a guy that didn't work with any successful teams. Look, he's not picking the players. He's not the owner of the team. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. You know, I mean, lots of people, it's hard to win in sports consistently. And, you know, lots of people have lots of different jobs in sports with lots of different teams. It doesn't mean that they're the people that are the reason why teams were successful or not. And oh, by the way, if you want to judge him, take a look maybe at what the business side of things did, because that's what he ran.
As somebody who's listening to this podcast, the way you should judge how he does at his job is the things that you care about going to the game or watching the game on TV or anything along those sides. The actual product on the field or on the ice is not in any way correlated, you know, goes back to him. But what about your seat? What about all of the stuff that you experience when you go to a game? The vibe, the actual like product when you're turning on a TV, it's a little bit different for football than it is for hockey, because with hockey, you know, the Sabres are producing that content, whereas in football, it's being done by the network, but still it's just like, those are the things that you should see how they change. That will be tied to him. Not if the Bills go win a Super Bowl next year, it's not because of Pete Guelli. If they go miss the playoffs, once again, it's not because of Pete Guelli.
All right. Well, Matt, we threw it out there for people to ask us questions on this podcast. You can tweet us at Sal Sports, at Matt_Bove. I want to start with this one because specifically we were, along with other media, apparently accused of not talking about something. So we're going to talk about it. All right. Here's James Dolinger. He says, does anyone realize that the Bills' offense got worse by pretty much every metric once Brady took over? And why does no one talk about this fact?
Well, because that's not true.
That's exactly right. The reason why no one talks about it, James, is because it's not a fact.
Yeah, they actually averaged like a touchdown more every game once Joe Brady took over than Ken Dorsey. So 7 points more every game, about 7 points more, is actually a good thing if you're trying to win football games.
And I also know that they were definitely better in the turnover department once Joe Brady took over.
I mean, they got noticeably better.
Yeah, there were definitely things that they did that they ran the ball more. So a lot of your passing metrics probably aren't going to be the same and up to where you want it to be. But anyway, James, there you go. We are talking about it. You say no one does. Well, the reason why no one does is because it's actually not a fact as you present it. So there you go. And by the way, they were 6-1 down the stretch. They won 6 of their last 7 games. So whatever they were doing overall, it was working for them. All right.
There's a lot of good questions here.
Okay.
We can just kind of
D-Rob, I got one real quick for you because we didn't talk about this.
Yeah.
And I bring it up because he says, is cornerback a sneaky need? And the reason I bring up this question is, did you see Mel Kiper's mock draft?
No.
Oh my God. Mel Kiper did a mock draft this week and he has the Bills taking a corner in the first round.
Really?
What are we doing?
I don't know.
Is corner a sneaky need for depth? Sure, you always need good corners. Yeah. It is not a sneaky need as far as your, top 3, I would say, are concerned.
You want to know why? Mel Kiper has been more right about Josh Allen than any other draft analyst, so he should get some credit there. The reason somebody could look at the Bills and say they need a corner is because people outside of Buffalo or Bills fans, so Bills fans everywhere, and people who are not here do not realize how good Christian Benford is. That is
100% correct.
Absolutely why. Because you look at the depth chart and you say, okay, Russell Douglas is a good player. I don't know who this Christian Benford guy is from Villanova. Like, that can't be right. He's awesome. They do not need to improve. I mean, you could always improve at every position. They have their guys for at least this year with Christian Benford and with Russell Douglas. Those guys are the starters. I feel as confident with those 2 guys starting, as long as nothing crazy happens, as I do with almost any other position on the field. They're your guys. Cornerback is a sneaky need, but it's a sneaky need because of depth reasons. It's finding your new Dane Jackson. It's finding your new backup to the backup. That stuff.
As long as we're on this, before we move on, you can choose another question. We cannot leave this pod without recognizing Taron Johnson signing a contract extension. We haven't talked about that. But man, just that's a really great thing for him and really good move for the Bills. He's not even 28 years old yet. He's going to be 28 this offseason, which is amazing. 3-year contract extension. So he's with the team for another 4 years contractually through the 2027 season. Highest paid player, slot corner in the league, but deserving. He's one of the best, if not the best slot corners in the league. He was an all-pro last year. He's been healthy the last several years after battling some injuries early in his career. This was a good move by the Bills, and I'm sure once we see the numbers, it will lower his cap number as well this year to give him some flexibility.
Yeah, but even the baseline, the first reported numbers don't seem outrageous. I would have thought that until I saw the Kenny Moore contract, I would have assumed that nickel corners made more than they do. So when you see Taron Johnson, 3-year extension, $31 million, that's not crazy to me. He feels like he's worth all of that and then some for how good he is on the defense. I've always thought Taron Johnson is their most underrated player, and now he's getting paid to be one of their best players, and I think he is.
What else you got? You got one you want to throw at me?
Well, there's a lot of good questions. Well, this one, let's get this out of the way. This is from Rochester. Has anyone from Brisbane been in touch? Have you had anybody reach out to you?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I have. I've had several, and I've DM'd back and forth with a few people about my trip to Brisbane coming up. My family. We're a little bit more than a week away from that, and yes, I have been in touch. We are going to try to have some sort of Bills fan meetup actually in Brisbane. Now, unfortunately, lots of Bills fans live in Sydney or Melbourne, and it's just too far away. But there are people who live close enough to Brisbane where we're going to try and do something to get together. So thank you for asking. And if you haven't heard yet, yes, I'm going to Brisbane. I'll be there from like March 30th through April 8th. And if there's any Bills fan out there who wants to try and get together, we're going to try and do that. So hit me up on X, and then we'll try to coordinate that and say hello.
I love this question from Donald. I don't know if you saw this question. I liked it because I liked it so much. Donald Parrish, who is on the Mount Rushmore of Bill's best and worst first-round picks? I freaking love this question. I love this question. I think the best is easy. I think the worst would be a little bit tricky. So let's go with the locks first. Collectively.
I wish I would have
first-round picks.
We got it. Well, we got to go because do you have it open? I mean, you got to look at them, right? The picks.
For first-round picks, I don't think you need to because
for the top
Bruce
four?
Bruce Smith is one of them.
Yep.
Jim Kelly is one of them. Yep. Josh Allen is one of them. So we've got 3 immediately. So we just have to find one other one. And first-round picks, as crazy as it sounds, Trey was one that immediately came to mind. But I don't know if he had the longevity that would qualify him as a Mount Rushmore guy.
The answer is O.J. Simpson.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he's a Hall of Famer.
He's one of the greatest running backs in NFL history.
Yeah, and Thurman was a second-round pick, right?
Correct.
Okay, so then by that, so I think we've got the Mount Rushmore of best, with it being Bruce Smith, Jim Kelly.
I'll go and just kind of poke through very quickly as we do this because that's what comes to mind, first of all, which is to me, it's got to be he's got to be the guy.
Yeah, well, I don't think you're wrong. I think 3 of them are very easy, and then I think the rest of them, well, I mean, is Joe DeLamielleure one?
Joe D was great. I mean, I'm not putting him over. He blocked for OJ, but I'm not putting him over OJ Simpson as far as, how great of an NFL player he was.
Okay. Well, I think we've got our top 4.
Okay.
Bottom 4 is tricky because there are so many of these guys that I never, ever, ever saw play. I would say in my generation and like my age group, the names that immediately jumped out to me were Kaiir Elam, but realize he's still a very young player. Aaron Maben was another one that I was like, yeah, that one didn't work out. I believe John McCargo, right? Wasn't he a first-round pick?
Yes.
John McCargo was another one that I thought of. And then you could start to think about the quarterbacks, right? Like, is J.P. Lossman on that list? Is E.J. Manuel on that list? Players like that. So anybody in particular, anyone that I'm missing?
I'm looking through some of these guys right now. Oh, Eric Flowers. Do you remember him?
Not even a little bit.
2000 number 1 pick, first round, 26 overall, defensive end. Eric
How
Flowers.
long did he play?
He played.
Oh my gosh,
total
2000 to 2001 with the Bills.
Yep. Eric
Wow.
Flowers.
He had 6 starts with the Buffalo Bills total in 2 years.
Mike Williams, the tackle. Remember him?
That was like
2002.
2002. Yeah,
He
I
was
don't
a bust.
remember
He was a
him.
complete bust. He just was. He was. No one doubted. Now, I remember that draft. I believe some people said you should take Bryant McKinney, and that's fine. But no one argued that Mike Williams and thought he was going to be a bad player. Everybody thought he'd be really good. He was horrible.
Yeah.
Couldn't stay in the league.
Kyer Elam, like I mentioned earlier, we still don't know. Besides that, though, like they've had a nice little, as they should, they've had a nice little run and like pretty good players here. From, Marshawn Lynch was obviously good. Leotis McKelvin played for a long time in this league. Eric Wood was a huge find for them. Marcel Daria, Stephon Gilmore.
The other one is the same year they drafted Jim Kelly, they took tight end Tony Hunter out of Notre Dame.
And he never turned in anything, right? No.
That's right. Now, Perry Tuttle was a receiver they took in the first round. I remember that because I loved Jerry Butler, and Perry Tuttle also went to Clemson. They drafted him, but I don't know if he had an injury, but Perry Tuttle was a complete bust as a first-round pick, a wide receiver as well.
So I think we figured out the Mount Rushmore of the good. The bad is we would need a little bit more time. But honestly, outstanding question here.
Yeah.
Let's see. There's a lot of good questions still. Let's just see. Here's one from Luke, and this is all just a preference, but he goes, which boundary wide receiver is the best fit for you? And he specifically mentions Leggett, Mitchell, and Coleman. Are there any of them that you think would be a really good fit for the Bills? I know we're still a month and a half away, so we've got more research to do.
No, I not necessarily. I mean, I don't think Coleman's the best fit. I don't think he is. I think, to me, it's not about who is the best fit. It might be who isn't a really good fit. And I don't think Coleman is the best fit.
I think
they're looking for guys with more separation than, and he can do a lot of things really well. But I think they're looking for a guy with a little more separation on the boundary, because Stephon Diggs at this point isn't getting separation like maybe some other guys can. And not that he ever was a huge separator, but even now you have to do different things with him.
I feel like Xavier Leggett has maybe a really high ceiling, but also a better chance that it doesn't work out. And Brandon Beane has not shied away from players like that. And to his credit, some of them have worked, some of them have not. But he feels like he's a player that's climbing draft boards. Like when you're in the mock draft season, when you're in like your mock draft simulator stuff, for months before this, you could say, oh, get Xavier Leggett in the second round. That's a great addition for the Bills. Now it doesn't feel like that's happening. Now it feels like I've seen his name in the first round far more, or I guess much more consistently. The one thing that's interesting to me, and this answers another question that somebody had, I'm sorry, I don't have the name in front of me, was that the idea of potentially trading back is something that's interesting if there's a good offer there. Like, because then you could address both things, right?
I think it would depend on who is still available.
That's what I mean. Like,
right?
Let's say there's a run
around the clock, I guess, right?
Exactly. You wait and you see, and it's honestly, it's different because of where they are. But this is what happened a couple of years ago when they ended up drafting James Cook. I think they got to that point and they liked a couple different players there and felt comfortable moving back to add more assets, knowing that they would get whatever player ultimately fell to them, which ended up being James Cook. But let's say you've got a couple defensive tackles you really like on the board and a couple wide receivers you really like on the board, and you've got an offer to move back 10 spots but pick up a third-round pick in the process. I think they're interested in doing that. And then you could use a second-round pick on a wide receiver. You could use a second-round pick on a defensive tackle. And then, boom, all of a sudden you could use a third-round pick that you didn't have before on a center or on something that isn't necessarily a huge pressing need right now, but could be down the road. So I think that it's not a sexy thing to do, but I think that there is a validity to that idea.
One more from me. Christina goes by. I love this. She's at Strawberry Mom on Twitter. The only thing is, I'll tell you, Matt, Christina's got a header pick, beautiful family, but there's a bunch of Capitals jerseys in it. And what's going on with that? Capitals jersey. So she must live in Washington. There you go. Leesburg, Virginia. Just fooling around there, Christina. We appreciate you with your question here. The question is, how excited is Matt to take his daughter to Disney? And what do you guys do when you're at the owners' meetings?
You want me to answer Disney first? You want to answer
Yes.
owners meetings?
Go ahead. You go Disney.
Let's be incredibly clear here. Taking a 1-year-old to Disney is not for the 1-year-old. It is for the parents.
Yes.
She will not remember any of this. She does not know what's going on. We are very excited. I've done all of my research. I would not say I'm a Disney adult, but I'm close. I really like Disney World. I loved going there as a kid. I love all the memories that I have there. So I'm excited to kind of, I don't want to say see it through her eyes because she's going to be asleep for a lot of it anyway because she's one, but I'm excited to there's 15 no height requirement rides at Magic Kingdom. So we will try and venture onto all of those. And we've got the little earmuffs for her, and we'll try and do the fireworks shows and all that kind of stuff. So we're very excited. Thank you for asking.
What do we do at the owners' meetings? Well, we kind of wait. We wait for the owners to come out of meetings. That's what they do. And I don't mean to be funny by that, but they have all these different kinds of meetings, these committee meetings. There's rules committees. There's different things on finance and stadiums. And you just kind of wait around for the owners to come out. And then you try to put a microphone in their face if you can. And I say that in all, respectful kind of way because you just have to grab them when you can. And lots of owners like, hey, I'll talk to you guys later or, not able to right now. And some just walk right over to you and you can get them. And some general managers, we will have an AFC coaches breakfast and an NFC coaches breakfast. The way that works is you show up 7:45 on Monday. There's a room with one table for every head coach. Sean McDermott has his, and you'll see Gerard Mayo over there, Mike McDaniel, and Andy Reid, and the media gets to sit at the table with the coach, put a microphone and a camera, and you basically just start asking questions, and it's pretty cool. Then you do the same thing for the NFC coaches breakfast. So yeah, it's just a lot of stuff that's it's waiting for information and then processing and reporting the information.
So I've only been to one owners meetings before. I'm going again this week, but the first time I went was 2 years ago, and it had to have been the easiest shooting fish in a barrel owners meetings ever because it was when the stadium approval happened, and it was also like a week after they signed Von Miller. So two massive stories. So half of my time was spent on stadium stuff and talking to other owners about why this is such a big deal for the Bills. And then obviously talking to the Bills on their side of it. There was also people from Populous there, and there were people from architecture firms there to talk about the stadium. And then when they signed Von Miller, it was talking to people about why Von Miller would be such a good fit for the Bills. And that year, they did the AFC's coaches breakfast first, followed immediately by the NFC. So I skipped the actual breakfast portion of it and went and did Sean McVay's interview. And asking Sean McVay about what Von Miller meant to their team was gold. The answers that I got were so incredibly good that it was like, okay, I know what my story is for tomorrow. This is what we're going to do. So yeah, it was a pretty easy year to go. I'm sure this year will be a little different.
Yeah, and it'll help. It'll help that the guys they've signed pretty much have come from NFC teams like Curtis Samuel and Toohill. So, but the only thing that's going to stink is, so I would normally go to the Commanders head coach, which would have been Ron Rivera, and say like, hey, tell me more about this person. But this year it's going to be Dan Quinn, so you're not getting as much from them. So I'll try and find somebody from Washington to do that. But that's how it works. And you just it's very laid back. And then Monday, though, there's a really big reception Monday night, and it's awesome. And there's lots of food and lots to drink, and it's everybody in the NFL, and it's laid back. It's not you don't bring a recorder, you don't bring a microphone, you don't bring a camera. You just talk and you get to know people and you build relationships and everybody's having a great time. And that's my favorite part of the owners meetings, to be quite honest with you.
Oh, for sure. It's amazing how much different things are when there's not a camera pointed at somebody's face or not an audio recorder up to their mouth. All right. I've got one closing question.
Okay.
This is from Elena Getzenberg of ESPN. Okay. Did you see my tweet the other day after I went and saw Les Mis? Did you see this?
No.
Okay. I took way too much heat on this tweet, and I want to make this clear. I tweeted, why didn't anybody tell me that Les Mis is the saddest musical ever? And a bunch of people responded, you didn't know the musical called Les Miserables would be sad. I said, I did not say that. I said, I didn't know it was going to be the saddest musical ever. I'm a 31-year-old guy. I'm pretty even. I don't cry very often. I don't get super emotional. I cried in this musical. It was so freaking sad. So Elena's asked, do you know the story at all? Have you seen it?
No.
Okay.
I know what Les Mis is. I don't believe I've ever seen it. I've seen like musicals like at high schools and performances, but I don't think that's one of them.
Okay. Long story short, my mom has season tickets to Shays. My mom and
Yep.
dad had them forever. You know, everything happens with my dad. My mom still wants to go to the show. I go with her. It's a super sad show. On the way there, she's explaining to me what the show is about. And it sounds like it's the most complicated story of all time. I'm like, there's no way in hell that I'm following this story at all. And then I get to the show and I follow it. It's so all the different like layers to it. So Elena's specific question is, which part of Les Mis surprised you the most? Why were you not prepared for the sadness? I'm not going to like ruin the story, but I didn't know all of those moments that my mom warned me about were just like the baseline, and then that they went into further detail on it. It's so sad. So like the first act was just, and then like the last part, it was all so freaking sad. Are you a musical guy?
You and I, yeah. You and I, we're very similar. We don't like to be sad. We're happy people, right? So that makes it even worse. Yeah, I'm a musical guy. I saw Hamilton last year. It was amazing.
It's coming back.
Yeah, I love it. I love that. I was. Have you ever been in a musical?
No, I've not been in a musical.
Never. Wow.
No, I've not been in a musical. I'm not a very musical person, but I've grown to really appreciate musicals. I love, obviously, everybody loves Hamilton. My favorite is Wicked. Wicked is unbelievable.
I have been in several musicals in school. Yes, when I was younger, I was Pinocchio in 6th grade in the musical Pinocchio. But then my senior year in high school, I was Conrad Birdie in Bye Bye Birdie. Have you ever seen Bye Bye Birdie?
I have not.
It's kind of a loose portrayal of Elvis when he had to go into the military.
Oh, okay. That sounds good.
I was the lead character who was kind of the loosely like based on Elvis.
You were Elvis.
Pretty much, if you want to go that route, but it's not Elvis, but yes. So yeah, and that was so that was pretty cool. So I've been in musicals. I was Joe Harper in Tom Sawyer in 5th grade, which is one of Tom's guys. You had Joe Harper, and you got the other one I can't remember, Huck Finn, and then you have Joe Harper with Tom Sawyer. So I was him too. So yeah, been in some musicals. Pretty cool.
When I think of Tom Sawyer, I think of the movie Forgetting Sarah Marshall with do you know that movie?
I do.
Slapping the Bass. I love Forgetting Sarah Marshall is good. Also,
when I think of Tom Sawyer, I think of the Rush song Tom Sawyer.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's what it's referring to in the movie. That's what it's, of course. Right. Neil Peart. I got the whole Rush thing. Yes. Also, Elena, the last scene of the entire musical was when I cried the most because I didn't know that's how it was going to happen. So I just wanted to put a bow on that. Is there anything else you want to talk about? Anything?
No, just want to hope that we didn't make anybody cry today here on the podcast. You know, you and I, we will see each other in Orlando the next time we probably physically see each other, I guess. But
yeah, that's actually a good point. I didn't even really think about that. A nice 6 a.m. flight on a Sunday with a 1-year-old kid. No idea how that's going to go.
This weather we are having is ridiculous.
So
listen, I love Buffalo. I live here. I came back here. We deal with the weather. It's not a big deal, but I'm kind of over it. And like, what is going on? We just had 70 degrees on March 4th, 72, and this is happening. So I need to get to Orlando for the owners meetings.
Yeah, well, and then after that, you get to go to Australia.
That's right. After that, I'm going to Australia. So yeah, I shouldn't really say much more. All right. Check us out on video. If you're listening to the podcast on audio, we are on video. You can see our smiling faces. At Sal Sports is the YouTube channel, Sal Sports. And of course, wherever you pod here, it's always game day in Buffalo. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Thanks to our producer, Mike Robier.